A review of scientific studies published by Dr. Oz revealed that his experiments killed over 300 dogs. But eventually, he got the recipe right. Dr. Oz has refused to comment on the report that his research killed over 300 dogs, though it's possible he couldn't hear the question over the wood chipper. But don't worry, Dr. Oz won everybody back last night when he gave a speech in front of Hitler's car. Worse, he then got into the car and backed over a dog.
From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, the top 5 things you could do in honor of Columbus Day without all those STDs. And now, the podcast host who's got no time for Columbus because he's all about that sweet hot CRT, Pete Dominic.
That's right. I don't care about Columbus Day. I just want to make sure that we're all learning critical race theory. Thank you very much, Pico. Good to have you back. Glad you are feeling better. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another week and another episode of Stand Up. Episode 699. Tomorrow is episode 700. You know what I'm doing for it? Something very special. Really nothing. Just regular show. But I'm very excited that we have come this far, and I cannot, could not, will not do it without you. So sign up now and support the show with a paid subscription, folks. Welcome to it. I've got an awesome, awesome guest joining me today. He is an emergency room physician and a world traveler. But most importantly, he used to be one of the players that I coached in junior high lacrosse and soccer. Dr. Calvin Sun joins me for the first time here on the show, and we talk for the first time in like 20 years, and I think you are really going to like this very special, enlightening, thought-provoking conversation with Dr. Calvin Sun and his new book, The Monsoon Diaries. If you are listening to this episode on Monday, I hope you had a great weekend. I did. I appeared on News Nation Friday night, Ashley Banfield's show panel. I do that almost Friday night. I rarely plug it, but I do. If you're doing nothing on a Friday night, come check that out. It's always fun. Saturday, I warmed up the audience at John Oliver and Last Week Tonight over on HBO, and a really great episode about how local journalists do such a terrible job reporting and scaring the hell out of people on crime issues. Really great episode. I hope you watch it. If you're not, smartest, funniest show on television. Very, very proud to be a part of that show every Sunday. Well, we tape generally on Saturdays, but it airs on Sunday on HBO. And then yesterday, spent much of the day, beautiful weather weekend here in the Northeast, spent much of the day closing the pool. And some of you might be asking, wow, Pete, why does a rich celebrity like you close his own pool? You know, folks, I like to see what it's like to be normal and do the work myself. Matter of fact, Val did most of the work, and I just put the cover on. But that wasn't easy, and it's always sad closing the pool. But on to autumn, apple cider donuts, pumpkin everything, football, and Francis in a corn maze on the weekend. That's right, Francis did go through and survive yet another corn maze, this one near Asheville, North Carolina. Francis, longtime listener and friend of the show, and we're happy you are okay, our friend. All right, let's get to some of the news from the weekend, some of the top stories. President Biden made good on a campaign promise to pardon people convicted of marijuana possession by the federal government, also urged governors to do the same. The Texas governor's like, nah, I'm not doing that, you jerk. I'm not doing that at all, but we'll see what happens with other governors like in California and New York. On Friday, the United States Department of Labor reported that there were 263,000 new jobs in September, according to the official report. Helped decrease the unemployment rate, but still fell short of expectations, apparently. Of course, everybody's talking about Herschel Walker and all the abortions he paid for, or didn't, and completely denies. A police officer in San Antonio was fired after shooting a teenager who was just sitting there eating a McDonald's burger, and the video is absolutely outrageous. Hopefully that police officer is charged with a crime. And there was another crazy Trump rally over the weekend in Nevada, which always seems to make headlines because he's got the craziest people there speaking. A lot of attention being paid to Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville and recording artist Kanye West over the weekend. As Tuberville said something super racist, and Kanye said something very dangerous and anti-Semitic. A Republican senator repeated a KKK rallying cry while saying black people do the crime, and Donald Trump bragged about his crowd size during the January 6th terrorist attack. And a new Republican darling, Kanye West, said he was going to DEFCON 3 on Jewish people, then had his Twitter account suspended. First, here is the senator and former football coach on his racist rant over reparations in this Nevada Trump rally over the weekend. If you already heard this, I'm sorry for playing it, but I want to give context to some of the commentary I also gathered from some of the weekend shows.
Some people say, well, they're soft on crime. No, they're not soft on crime. They're pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Bullshit. They are not owed that.
I mean, how much different would the comments and the way they were delivered be if it were a Klan rally, really? I don't think any different at all. Senator Tommy Tuberville, who's CNN's Abby Phillips, who's a black woman, reacting just aghast.
I mean, just straight up racism from a sitting United States senator, but really talking to white voters about their own preconceived notions of black people being responsible for crime and not deserving anything as a result of it.
Right. And they being the Democrats who, are supportive of the supposed black crime, which, as you said, I mean, there's no other way to look at that and listen to that and say that it isn't racist. I mean, it is racist. But one thing is that, again, this, as well as the Herschel Walker element, it's all playing to this majority white base. If you look at what determines whether someone is Republican now, it tends to be whether they're white and, whether they're how religious they are and what type of religion do they subscribe to.
And their education levels.
And their education levels.
Strong.
So, the Republicans are playing to this predominantly white evangelical Protestant base. And they believe that because, again, this all comes down to power. It's not really about abortion. And it comes down to the fact that they're okay with their elected officials either saying racist things or potentially paying for an abortion because they want their people in power instead of Democrats.
It's a really sad state of affairs.
Indeed it is. That's CNN's Abby Phillips with White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, Laura Barron Lopez, also in conversation there. Now, let's stick with CNN, and here's Van Jones reacting to that same clip.
It's just racism on top of racism, wrapped up in some racism and deep fried in some more racism with some racism powder on it. Everything he's saying is unacceptable. For him to say that Democrats want crime because that's a way for black people to get reparations is for him to say that all the criminals are black, number one, which is not true. Number two is to say that reparations is somehow about taking stuff from individual white people, which is fear-mongering, which is not what reparations is about at all. It's just, I mean, it's really shocking. And, I'm looking at a Republican Party that's willing to do backflips into the toilet to excuse Herschel Walker's activity and then say nothing about this kind of thing. But it's really, really offensive. And I think it's scary because it points to kind of a paranoid style of politics. There's some, conspiracy of Democratic elites and I guess gang members and cartels or whatever, all of which is just trying to take stuff from white people. And it's not true. It's dangerous, and listen, you don't hear me call people racist that often. I don't play that card very often. But if this is not racist, there is nothing that's racist. And this is complete for him to conflate crime and reparations and say they're coming after you is completely beyond the pale.
All right, one more on this. This is NBC News' Kristen Welker. She was in for Chuck Todd doing a great job on Meet the Press. And she had Republican Nebraska Congressman named Don Bacon on. He did not have a very strong reaction, and she really pushes him on this. And it's, well, take a listen.
The primary reason, in my view, is we have these far-left prosecutors, county attorneys, and mayors who are releasing violent criminals back on the street.
But Congressman, there is a different way to say that. I mean, most people heard those comments and felt not just polite, but a lot of people heard those comments as being racist.
Yeah, that's not the way I present things, but we got to be honest that we have a crime problem in our country.
But do you feel as though those
prosecutors
comments cross a racial line, Congressman? Do they cross a racial line?
I'm not going to say he's being racist, but I wouldn't use that language. Be more polite. But the fact is, we can't ignore.
Okay. Well, no, I mean, I would not say anybody is racist because there's I didn't see any issue with that at all. That is Republican Nebraska Congressman Don Bacon, who has never, ever witnessed racism in his life, apparently. Certainly doesn't perpetrate it. I'm sure he is a really open-minded, anti-racist fella who doesn't have a racist bone in his body. All right, let's head back to CNN for a random clip I just loved. I mean, I think that James Carville is crazy, and he's done some really bad shit with his career in terms of consulting, I think, third world authoritarian leaders for money. But I still like this moment where he was on CNN with Jim Acosta and Republican Scott Jennings, and Jennings criticizes Biden, calling him weak and all that. Listen to Carville. He just snaps, and I love it.
I mean, I think they see Joe Biden is weak, and I think this issue has been plaguing him. I know they were touting it.
Well, this is, you know who doesn't think that Joe Biden is weak? Vladimir Putin, the Republican hero of the United States. The man that the Republican Party worship is getting the crap kicked out of him right now with U.S. support and a Joe Biden-led coalition. If they want to love the Saudis, that's their business, all right? The United States is making a successful stand, and what, in my opinion, is the most successful foreign policy initiative since World War II.
Well, there you go. That is James Carville's view of things and how the Biden administration has handled Russia's invasion in Ukraine. All right, let's continue with random clips. This is the Republican governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, who a lot of people think might run for president, for some reason agreeing to sit down with CNN's Jake Tapper. And I think this clip speaks for itself.
Governor, this policy could be seen. I could see very easily how it excludes parents. Look. Here's a question for you. The American Academy of Pediatrics says these kinds of laws about bathrooms and excluding people, ignoring their gender identity. They say, the American Academy of Pediatrics says these kind of laws can increase the risk of depression, anxiety, and even suicide among transgender youth. Did you talk to any transgender youth when coming up with this policy?
Yes, so we've had lots of interactions across
transgender youth,
across the administration. And let me just back up. What we're not saying is that there's no accommodation. What we're saying is parents have to be engaged in that decision. And if a child and their parent, along with administrators and teachers, choose to have accommodations for that child, they'll be granted. And see, this is where I constantly get back to, I would ask people to read the policies. I
did read the policy, but it sounds like you're excluding parents that might be supportive of their child going to the bathroom or joining a sports team that is in alignment with their gender identity.
Well, certainly not. If parents actually want their child to be able to change a pronoun or their name or use a bathroom, if parents choose that, then legally that's what the schools will do. With regards to sports teams, this is a different issue. And I do believe that it's unfair for girls to have biological boys play sports with biological girls.
All right, Glenn Youngkin on CNN. You know, I reached out to my friend Jessie Gender, who is one of the biggest transgender YouTubers out there. She's a total nerd and does a lot of sci-fi stuff, but does a lot of these kinds of issues as well. Does deep dives like a journalist, and she is so good. And I'm going to probably be taping with her this week to talk about all of those issues. But you probably heard Jon Stewart with the Arizona lieutenant governor. But I mean, this doesn't get old. And I actually hadn't heard this part of the interview with Jon Stewart and the Arkansas AG. Rutledge is her name.
We're going to allow these children to be children. And as they are, we want to, again, encourage them to have the access to the mental health care, because none of us can imagine, whether it's my daughter, your daughter, your son, any of us can imagine having those conversations.
If my daughter or my son came to me in agony and I knew there was a program that I could get them into that had positive effects on their mental health, I would swim across rivers and climb mountains and tunnel through whatever I needed to get to save that child's life. And my guess is you'd do the same. And I truly hope you're never faced with that decision, because I imagine it's agonizing for the parent.
Yes.
And it's agonizing for the child But the fact that you've removed that option for people seems antithetical to the values you profess to espouse.
Well, again.
Right. That's where the clip cut. Sorry, but go watch Jon Stewart on Apple TV. The Problem is the name of that show. Very, very good. The Problem with Jon Stewart. He's doing great work. Continues to. All right. I opened with a joke. Let's end the news segment with a joke, and then we'll get to my excellent guest, Dr. Calvin Sun. Here back to Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update with Michael Che.
Georgia Senate candidate Herschel Walker denied reports that he paid for a girlfriend's abortion, saying, "I send money to a lot of people," before adding, for abortions. After the news broke that Walker paid for his ex-girlfriend's abortion, he raised more than $500,000 because dollars are the only thing Walker is willing to raise.
Planned Parenthood says it will soon open its first mobile abortion clinic in the country, which will make it easier to provide care to patients anywhere in the country that Herschel Walker has visited.
All right. One more thing. I did want to read this to you because I don't know if you followed at all what Kanye West has been doing and saying. First, he was seen wearing a White Lives Matter t-shirt. And of course, he worked with President Trump. And now he, over the weekend, threatened to go, quote, DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. In a really dangerous tweet, they got him, I think, suspended or banned from Twitter. But I like this from Michael Harriot, who's always brilliant, about Kanye West. He writes, what if he's an artistic savant and he's mentally ill and he's an egomaniacal narcissist and he doesn't read books and he doesn't give a fuck about black people, and all of those things are unrelated? Michael Harriot with the final word on Kanye West for the weekend, at least for me. All right, well, I have a very special guest joining me here on episode 699 because I was his lacrosse and soccer coach in the late 90s at a prestigious private school in Manhattan when I was pursuing a career in comedy. I can't wait to tell you all about him. You're going to love this conversation. But first, I got to tell you that rapid growth for your business doesn't have to come with growing pains, right? When you have ambitious hiring goals, you need a partner to help you get there. And you need Indeed, folks. And I got to tell you, Indeed.com is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all right there on Indeed. Finding top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. So if you hate waiting, and I hate waiting, I hate it, Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Lots of listeners taking advantage of Indeed.com and hiring people, and you should too. They have this great feature, the virtual interview. You don't have to make your candidates jump through all these hoops, and they have all these interview tools. You just download, click, and talk. You can message, schedule, and interview top talent all in one place. Indeed makes it easy to connect with your applicants. No need to install anything extra. Indeed's virtual interview tool will work from your browser. Save the headaches. Interview virtually with no downloads, plugins, or purchases. Do it all in one place. Indeed knows when you're growing your business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why when you sponsor a job, you only pay for quality applicants and their resumes in our database matching your job description. So visit Indeed.com/standup to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/standup. Indeed.com/standup. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. And oh, by the way, in the minute I've been talking to you, 16 hires were made on Indeed. Go to Indeed.com/standup now. All right, well, this is so cool that I have my next guest joining us. When I moved to New York City in 1995, I did all kinds of things to make my rent, to pay my rent while going to school. I worked at a sporting goods store, I worked as a personal trainer, and I worked as a lacrosse and soccer coach at a very prestigious private school in Manhattan, filled with New York's most affluent kids, including the Trump boys and so many other kids as well. But it was a really great experience. I did it for, I think, 3 or 4 years. I coached girls soccer, but I also coached boys soccer and lacrosse, both sports I played at the varsity level. I don't want to brag, but mostly sat at the bench. But I loved doing it. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I love working with kids, and unlike a lot of teachers and educators, I really liked the 7th and 8th grade level that I worked with when I was there. I made friends for a lifetime working there, and I've kept in touch with some of the students, some of the players of mine over the years. They were always so good to me and rooting for my career and me for theirs. And so it was pretty special when I saw that one of those players, Calvin's son, who was on my lacrosse team and soccer team, has become a board-certified physician. He specializes in emergency medicine, but he's also a public speaker. He's an author. He's become an activist and a travel writer based out of New York City. He's worked at all kinds of different emergency departments, most notably during the COVID-19 pandemic, which he documented day to day and has written about it in this amazing new book, The Monsoon Diaries, a memoir published by HarperCollins, a foreword by Lisa Ling. Calvin's son, Dr. Calvin's son, is a big deal. This is so cool. I was so excited to talk to him. He writes a book drawing upon the lessons he learned from his adventures traveling in more than 190 countries in 10 years, which is the other crazy thing. I haven't talked to this guy in 20 years. He was just a little kid when I met him and coached him. And now 190 countries later and a whole life's worth of journeys, as well as the grief he experienced when he was a teenager, when he lost his dad. He shares that journey from growing up as a young Asian American in New York to his calling first to medical school and then to the open road. And he is just an unbelievable young man. Really impressed with him. I think you're going to like our conversation. And what you're about to hear is basically when he popped up on my screen. The moment we met, I recorded it all and we jumped right in. The Monsoon Diaries is out now. Dr. Calvin's son joins me for the first time right now. Yeah!
Hey, Coach.
Coach.
Holy shit.
Nobody has called me that since you in
of course
many years.
We got a lot to unpackage. I'll tell you why I call you Coach.
Okay.
I still think of you.
I'm already recording. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've seen you on TV a couple of times. I've seen you on like New Year's Eve throwbacks on like CNN and
right.
MTV. It was like the top 100 ways, or the
sure,
best 100 things that happened last year.
Yes.
I was just like, damn, that was like I haven't forgotten you, and it there's a lot of reasons why. So it's kind of nice to have you still be in touch and come full circle like this.
Yeah, I kept in touch with a lot of the young men I got to coach when I was at the Trinity School. And I think in your case, at least with that final string of Facebook, and I don't recall seeing many posts. I mean, I literally just found out all that you have accomplished and done in your life. And I couldn't be more impressed and more proud.
Oh, thanks.
But I just saw the book come through on a Facebook post. I was like, wait, Calvin's son is a physician who wrote a book about and then I've been prepping for you for days and all morning, and I'm just blown away. I'm just absolutely, I can't wait to catch up and be friends. I can't wait to see you soon. I'll be in the city tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, you don't look like you're in New York. That's like a cabin in the woods.
It's my shed in the nice. Burbs just north of the city in Rockland County. That's out in back of my house, a shed, but I work in the city. I work on John Oliver's show on HBO.
Oh yeah.
So, but I would love to catch up with you. But I want to get recorded, and I want to kind of share this stuff that I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time, and I wanted to get on the record this part of my life and what your memories were of that, because that was a really important time in my life, and I became extremely close with Hank Moses, your former headmaster. Yeah. He became like a mentor and personal friend of mine. And so I have a lot of connections to that time and that school. But what do you remember about, playing lacrosse and all that?
Lacrosse, you were also my soccer coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm going to get into the fields if that's okay. I don't know how.
Please. I really want to. I really want to. It would mean a lot to me.
I recall that you were one of the fewest people. You're one of the few people, this is hard to recall when I say it out loud now. You're one of the few people that was kind to me. You remembered who I was, and you validated me at a time where most everyone else just wrote me off. And that you were so supportive when I was on the field, that you gave me a chance. You didn't, I belonged as a bench warmer. And Trinity had these sports requirements, and those are my, I enjoyed playing those sports. And I knew that compared to the other athletes and Trinity survivors, because I came in 5th grade, I could not measure up. And I was in an environment where I felt bullied, and the faculty and older people in Trinity could only do so much, but it was a very isolating experience throughout middle school and part of high school, especially in the context of sports and team sports. And you were the only coach that talked to my parents, to know my name, and to smile around me. There was no sense of brutal hazing in the sense of being ignored back in Trinity. So I always took that with me. And when you came up to speak during our graduation, and the fact that you were even there for all of us was already valuable in a general sense for the entire class. But the fact that you made eye contact with me and nodded was another validation of my existence. Obviously, there were plenty of other athletes and my classmates that you got along better with and you were better friends with. Like Lay says hi, by the way.
Oh,
and,
wow.
And I always admired that you didn't feel like you were entitled or better than, or this was just a transition period for you to get to, where you're supposed to be, which is, out in the media and stand-up comedy and doing this. And the fact that you valued every moment with us as students was already good enough for me in a general sense, but individually, you were out of all the other coaches and especially in the realm of team sports, you gave me a chance.
Wow. That is really very moving, and I'm extremely grateful for everything you just shared. Trying not to weep about it.
You may not have noticed it. I know you're a good guy and kind to everyone, but the fact that you added me into your league of people to be kind to was meant more to me than you know. So, those habits that we have, just being kind in general. Sure, maybe that's what you are with everyone, but it still did not take away from how much it meant to me at the time, which I really needed.
Yeah, I think I don't know really what to say in response or how to analyze that, but I suppose that I recognized what it meant to be a 7th or 8th grade boy. And siren is so loud. Does that give you you muted it? That's fine. I'll finish. I think I recognize what it meant to be in 7th and 8th grade. It's such just a sensitive time where you feel so insecure. You're really trying to figure out who you are. And, a lot of boys would come off as very cocky and arrogant. And I thoroughly enjoyed kind of curbing that so that I could bring everybody around to the same spot. And I had that luxury I think that everybody knew I was a comedian. And so like when the alphas on those teams and those schools would come over and I would see the way they might treat and talk to other players and students. I would watch all of it. I saw every single moment. And so I made sure everybody got, a part of me, and I hopefully saw them and played them also, because the idea that somebody wouldn't play on the field in 7th and 8th grade was a human rights violation in my mind. Come on.
Equalize the playing field. I mean, that's what we're all here on this planet, right? To speak up for the voiceless and trying to, equity.
Yeah,
it's not equality; it's equity. We pick up people when they fall. Not everyone's born the same or have the same privileges. And
how did you? Well, let's get into. You can talk about everything, and congratulations on your entire life. What a weird or unique situation we find ourselves in this conversation that I'm taping now, in terms of how we met and what roles we played in each other's lives back in the late 90s, and now talking over 20 years later with all that both of us have done, but really want to talk about what you have done and how you arrived at it, because you have lived a fascinating life, Dr. Calvin's son, and I want to get into it, but how did you arrive at some of the opinions and feelings that you just expressed here just now in terms of equity, that you've expressed at TED Talks, that you've written about and talked about all over really the world? Like how are you formed? Because you're like first generation, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, I guess half, because my mom didn't go to higher education, but my dad was super educated, but he had immigrated for his PhD. So, he did go to college, but I would say that, keeping to the theme, I was bullied a lot. In 7th and 8th grade was like probably the worst times in my Trinity years. 9th grade, the whole batch of new kids came in, and I was able to reset. And, it takes 2 years to learn, and I got by. But 7th to 8th grade was so isolating, and, being kicked when I was down. Later half of 6th grade when I realized like I was not really happy at all. My parents weren't very supportive, and just being among the people who I'd say like couldn't identify a true friend, kindness was just such a valuable resource to me, or receiving it, feeling like I could even deserve kindness and love at a time where nobody else was granting me that, because I understand that everyone else in 7th and 8th grade were also going through changes, and that's a scary time, growing pain. So out of fear, they would pick on the people who they can put that as their reservoir of fear onto.
Yeah,
they wouldn't. It's not a 7th grade time. 7th and 8th grade is not a time where we go through psychotherapy and become self-aware.
Right.
We dump it on other people who think that we become the receptacle of those fears. We've seen it during the pandemic, and I didn't really realize that was the formation of why I do a lot of things I do now until only 2-3 months ago. I was waiting in an airport in July on the way to West Africa, and I just like hit me. And I was like, man, everyone talks about their parents as the reason for their trauma or the source of their trauma, which is true. A lot of it is. But I've been so focused on, my father and my mother just being emotionally absent. I'm grateful to them. They gave me an education. They were always, making sure that I had a roof over my head, but they were never emotionally there to address my complex feelings when you grow up in New York, especially in a place like Trinity. And so I completely forgot. And then my father dying after he told me he was proud of me, a week after he told me he was proud of me, he like died from a sudden heart attack. Like, I was so focused on that. And that's a lot of what my book is about. But I completely forgot all the growing up trauma of being a kid that never really fit in middle school, at a time where I think I allude to the book even, the adolescence is when your frontal lobe goes offline, because that's what puberty does.
Yeah.
And you can't really reconcile all these emotions and thoughts until like 20 years later in an airport in July of 2022, 20 years after the fact. And you're like, and now I'm going through the process, even on this podcast with you, you are witnessing the evolution of my understanding of how impactful those years were. And I don't want to give them any attention, the bullies, but I do recognize their angst and their fears that they projected onto me in 7th and 8th grade is now my fuel to have done everything I have done in the last 15 years. Do you
have you explored ideas around compassion? Can you find compassion, for the bullies of your past?
Oh, absolutely. I just spoke at a medical school 2 days ago, and I had said, it's not about empathy. We always put too much emphasis on empathy. Yeah. If we empathize with everyone, we're going to get exhausted. I can't understand. I'm not going to get into, I don't want to get into every well with you, but there's compassion. We need to have compassion. Yeah. Those are the people who understand you're in the well, who takes their time to sit with the feelings and will try to help you from where I am. I cannot get into the well with them. They have all their reasons for why they projected their negative emotions and actions onto this new kid at Trinity, whether they're their own parents or it's isolating to grow up with so much privilege in that sense. I get it. That's the compassion. I recognize that thing, but that's their job to figure out and reconcile. I'm doing my work right now. So all the bandwidth that I can afford is to appreciate what I've learned from the interactions that I've had with those ghosts of the past, whether it was in the past or right now, because what memory is a projection of the present, where I'm going back in time over and over. And I'm saying, you know what? Instead of being angry at you, I'm thanking you now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a really wonderful, evolved, enlightened, thoughtful way of articulating it that I haven't really heard anybody do it. Do you mind just visiting the ghosts just for a moment in terms of just because I was there and I probably knew some of those guys. If you named them, we won't, but obviously, but like how were you bullied and how do you think it affected you at that vulnerable age? 12, 13, I guess.
Yeah, so I entered Trinity in 5th grade. Yeah. So being taken away from my public school upbringing, I went to public school up until 4th grade, and I was not doing well. And my parents freaked out because, I was not doing well in school, and I was getting getting to schoolyard fights. And so they pulled me and put me into, what they think would fix everything, a private school environment with full of privilege. And 5th grade was fine because I had a buddy system, and therefore my buddy became my friend. So you're young enough that you're just nice to everyone because, But then once you start going through puberty, which is 6th to 7th grade for all of us, people start getting
not for all of us. Uncontrolled. Speak for yourself, sir. It took me a long time. I think I might have been like 9th or 10th grade. It was horrific. That was my issue. But go ahead. Yes,
it was a nightmare. We just didn't know how to navigate through our emotions. So all we could do was externalize and dump it on other people. Yeah. And 7th to 8th grade, I wasn't the most athletic. I was kind of weird because I came from public school, and I was going through other schools that my parents were forcing me to go to. And, I didn't have the same background as most of my classmates. I was also a student of color. There was only one other person, and that was Lay. And I hope we're not friends because we're the only 2 Asian guys in the class, but we gravitated towards each other probably because of that background, that the background signal of the pink elephant in the room that we didn't want to say. So because of that, it was isolating to not only just look different, but also have a different upbringing, different background I could not relate to, and then being dumped on when other kids were also going through the same weird emotions, but they were maybe taught or they made a habit out of just making it someone else's problem. And I was more of a receiver, where I grew up with parents that told me what to do, and I would just say, sure, not knowing that was taking away from my bandwidth. But having your life planned out in front of you by parents who mean well is kind of convenient. So when I look up to people who have been in Trinity for longer, I should go back into the habit of just receiving their negative angst, because I've done that with my parents. But the difference is that maybe they don't have the best of intentions. So what ended up happening was I started believing all their criticisms of me, because if my parents made me believe that I was a bad student and therefore I needed to move to Trinity, and therefore I was a young kid who, better than I know, I didn't develop my rebelliousness until 9th to 10th grade. The 7th and 8th grade, I was also saying, well, if they're right, so must be other people that know better. So when they're bullying me and saying these horrible things about me in front of my face, I would have tended to sided with them and agreed with their perception of my personality. And I've taken that onto myself, which is the problem that we have now in this day and age. When you get criticized, the danger is when you start agreeing with your critics than your supporters, because you feel that they're validating something that you've always known about you when they could be as wrong as anyone else.
Yeah, it's really hard to know, because you also want to listen to the criticism. Yeah. And if enough people that you care about are giving you the same note, at least in my case, I'm like, I better take a look at that quality of mine. Doesn't seem to be working for these people. That's really interesting to hear, and we could talk about those days and what they meant to you. But man, you have lived a life, and I want to get into it. And congratulations on the book. The Monsoon Diaries. I'm so enjoying it for all of the reasons that are obvious about why one would. And of course, I've explained it a bit at the opening, Calvin. But tell us first about, how you got into travel. I mean, it's such your whole story is fascinating, very spontaneous at times. But why, apparently you never left New York City. You never went anywhere until one night you lost a bet and got on a plane and went to Egypt during the Arab Spring, even though you'd never traveled. Do I have that right?
The early parts. It wasn't that bad at the time. I got out before it fomented into something worse.
The early parts, but it was bad enough to be like, maybe I should go.
Yeah. And it was for a girl that I met.
Right, of course. Bartending. Well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
It's all, I think behavior patterns recycle themselves. And I think what happened in middle school was I was so scared of breaking out of my shell because I felt like every time I took a chance, I would get bullied back and pushed back in. I feel like I'm a better player in my team sports now, just simply of learning confidence and faking it till you make it.
Yeah.
If you give me a soccer ball right now or a lacrosse ball, I think I would actually be better, even though I haven't touched it in like years, than the middle school kid who went to practice every day, practice outside of practice every day and still couldn't get by just because that kid didn't have that confidence.
Right.
And because I didn't have that confidence, I felt that leaving New York was going to be a risk. And the scary part is actually associating constant anxiety and risk with comfort. It becomes your normal. So as long as I feel scared of something and not do it and feel bad about not doing it, I end up in this recycling, this goes back and forth that I feel comfortable with. I become comfortably uncomfortable. And then if I'm happy, then I must be feeling, I should be feeling guilty because I shouldn't be like content with things because then I'm not doing enough. Then I hear my parents saying, well, you need to study harder because unless you're getting 100%, you're not doing enough. And no one's really 100%. I couldn't get comfortable with good enough is good enough. And when I went to college and after college, I never left the country except for like spring break with friends who they had to drag me into spring break in Mexico, which I don't quite count because I was never alone. And it wasn't until that night at a bar where I met a girl who liked me enough, which is also a weird feeling because the past is the present. I was like, someone likes me enough to stick around the bar. And she was very popular and she didn't want to leave. And she kept egging me to join her to Egypt on her family trip in 2 to 3 days as a joke. But, when you're at a bar, you kind of just say anything. And one thing led to another where, I first said, because the middle school me said, no, I can't go. I don't want to go. But in order to sound cool enough, I was like, fine, I'll go if tickets are under $800 because there were 2,000 at the time. Mm-hmm. That way it's out of my control, absolving my responsibility. But one thing led to another, and then it ended up dropping down to 650 within 24 hours when we were all hanging out still. So that night became the next morning. And the day after, when I introduced it to two of my friends, also going to eat at the same time. And then we were checking it, and then it was $650 right before we all parted ways. And I was like, have a fun trip. And I checked it one more time. And then I was like, fuck. And I was like, shit, I have to go because I'd rather be $650 poor, capitalizing on a good deal, by the way. That's a great deal.
Yeah.
And I'd rather be $650 poor and a man of my word rather than someone that flakes on their promises. And I showed up, and I realized when I showed up that they were only going to be there for a few days and not for 3 weeks. I had just somehow it was some kind of miscommunication. And I found myself alone 3 weeks in a foreign country I didn't prepare for without any knowledge of how to speak the language, no one to turn to. And the expectation was I would be with someone for 3 weeks. So that turned my world upside down. And I didn't like the experience. First week, I hated it. The second week, I was getting used to it. And it wasn't until 3 weeks of it when I realized, oh, this is why people love traveling. I was dragged kicking and screaming for 3 weeks to like something that most people lived their entire lives yearning for.
Right.
They were born yearning for. I love traveling, and I just didn't understand it. But what I realized was that first week when I hated it was because I hated myself.
Mm.
It was the first week ever in my entire life where I was no longer connected to anything. I knew no one. Nobody knew me. I couldn't speak the language, and I couldn't even understand advertisements on billboards or TV screens. That means the only person I could commune with was myself. And if I hated the first week when all I could be with was myself, that means I hate myself. It's all the mirrors are on me. But 3 weeks of it, I eventually got used to myself and came back. And I think that's when I started developing the habit of exploring an appreciation for the self, which is I just survived 3 weeks in Egypt alone. You relied on nothing but yourself and the kindness of strangers. You have now a faith in yourself a little bit. It starts to grow now, and faith in humanity. And that's when I started traveling.
I want to come back to this part of your life and traveling, because you created a whole company, over 200 countries that you've visited since that trip. And it's really hard to understand how you were able to travel so much while becoming and then being a physician, in particular, an ER physician. So how do you have time to travel while you're in medical school so much?
Habits. It's like brushing your teeth. You know, when you like go out for a bender and you come back home and it's like 5 a.m, 6 a.m, you are dead tired. You might be with somebody. The sun is rising and you're like, I need to sleep because I have a meeting, I don't know, like 5 hours later and I have a morning thing, or maybe not. And you are looking at your toothbrush or your pajamas and you're like, fuck that. I'm going to go sleep in bed in my clothes because the bed looks really nice. And then somehow you end up finding yourself brushing your teeth still or changing into your pajamas, even though it's like the hardest thing to do in that moment. You're like, if I don't do it, then my teeth are going to fall out. It's the habits. There's nothing more powerful than something that takes over your body when your will falters. And there's nothing stronger than the smallest of habits. And that's how I felt with traveling, where I turned it into a habit. I went on a trip in medical school for 20 hours where I left for San Diego for a wedding. And it was right before an exam, my first one of the year of medical school. And I come back Sunday night right before the exam, take it Monday. Didn't do that well, but barely got by because I was studying on the airplane. But I was mentally recharged and refreshed. I was like, this is great. And I did it one more time to Hong Kong for a flight I found for $400 to $500 and left on Friday. Took 20 hours to get to Hong Kong, New York to Vancouver to Hong Kong. Spent 20 hours in Hong Kong. Met actually a few friends that had big stories from there, but then came back 20 hours later by Sunday night for another exam on Monday. And then it became an addiction in a good way because, you know, after so many of it, I could look back and it's like, wow, I still have my teeth. I ate my vegetables. And also, finally, I had just caught up with a friend from Trinity. She was 5 years younger. And she had said, well, it's also because you learned a lot of good habits from Trinity. And we went to undergrad at Columbia together as well, of getting a lot of shit done in a short amount of time. So the efficiency. And I remember in high school at Trinity, I was president of a lot of different clubs. So that also helped.
And then also president, apparently, of your class at Columbia as well. Is that right?
Vice president of my class at Columbia and president of my class at medical school.
I mean, what's all that about? What's all that ambition about?
I really believe that, especially in the context with you, I mean, we're all each other's mirrors, right? And you're reflecting back onto me of what I remember myself in middle school. It's me giving the finger to all my tormentors back in middle school and high school. I was never going to be student council in Trinity. I was just so far removed from being in the, what some would say, the in crowd. So being able to reset the room and doing that in Columbia, I had Trinity kids at Columbia that were just like telling other friends about me when I was in Trinity. And I was like, that's not true at all. So I had a classmate at Columbia who I went to Trinity with, And that was when I was vice president and student council, and that was, I guess, the new me. And everyone's like, oh, what was he like in Trinity? And she would say like, oh, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, do we go to the same high school? Because you kind of ignored me. And you were saying like, oh, we were friends. And he was friends with everyone. I was like, I was friends with the classes below me. Within my class, it was like maybe a handful of people. And I wasn't invited to anything unless it was by happenstance. And there were some people who turned around and gave me a chance about sophomore and junior year. And, eventually it was in a healthy space, but I never felt close to anyone. I was always felt like I was a roamer, but I was very close to the classes below me. And maybe that is being class president and vice president was me trying to relive middle school and high school again and redefine it.
That's so interesting. As you're saying that, I think you're helping me. I mean, I think I knew this at the time. It's not some major discovery, but it's certainly something I'm revisiting. Is the reason I became lacrosse and soccer coach at Trinity, partially a huge reason why was to right the wrongs that had been done to me in sports by coaches.
Wow.
And
holy shit.
I probably talked about that with you guys, but I was tiny. I was the littlest kid. I loved sports. But I just, even in 6th grade, like Little League, I sat the bench in Little League. I was like, it's Little League. Put me in the game. It's baseball. It's what?
What are the stakes?
Yeah, they were winning. They were winning and losing. They were ego. They were men wanting to win and play their own kids. And then in high school, same thing. Now, I'm not saying I ever deserved to actually be on the field. It was the way I felt and was treated by the coaches and some of the players. I mean, not all of them. Most people liked me because of my personality, and that's also how I became a comedian. But like I was minimized and marginalized through sports, and I hated that because I just thought there was so much more to learn about yourself. And so getting the opportunity to coach boys and girls actually at Trinity, 7th and 8th grade soccer and boys lacrosse, I was writing those things. I was like, no, I'm going to be I want to include everybody. I want everybody to feel like included. And if I'm watching the alpha kids bully the other kids, I'm going to make sure they know I'm watching them, and I'm going to make sure they know what it feels like in that moment, because everybody's going to get the same. And I would bust their chops. I know I would.
Yeah, you did it in a very comedic way.
Sure.
When there was an alpha that put themselves out there.
Yeah.
And the moment they tried to thought they were hot shit, you had set a crack that wasn't bullying. It was just a redirect that made them laugh, but then also kind of step back down.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was trying to do. I'm so glad that was received. Wow. Yes.
You teased them with compassion, but you also reminded them that they were also just a middle school kid.
Yes.
And you were the coach.
Exactly right. In the end. And, it was fun. It's fun. And you can relate to this, I'm sure. It's when there's an alpha in the room, I keep using that word, but there's some cocky kid, and we can have compassion for why this person might be this way. They take a shot at you. And 7th and 8th grade boys they would try to make fun of me. And I could not wait for it. Bring it. Because I would just, lightly turn it around, or I would take it. I wouldn't be bruised by it. I would give them a compliment I would laugh if it was a good joke. You got a good joke on me? You win. But don't you think I'm not going to forget it, and we're going to have some fun now on the bus.
It's jujitsu. You're not beating them down.
Right.
You're just taking their energy and reflecting back onto them, so they learn a little lesson about what they're entitled to and what their limits are.
I hope so. I don't think I did any damage, according to what I've heard from those people who are now grown up. And you, sir, became an ER physician, and I wish I had connected with you during the pandemic, because I know you were doing media hits like a lot of physicians were, but you were documenting your entire experience, and I want to make sure we talk about that here, because you write about it, of course, in your book, and you've documented it on social media in every possible way. And I'm just so profoundly impressed by, how you handled it all. You are a true hero. You saved thousands and thousands of New Yorkers' lives, and probably elsewhere as well. And I want to talk about what that was like, because you journaled about it the whole time, including at the beginning. Explain your job. You're per diem ER physician, meaning you would go to different hospitals all around New York City and different ERs. So you got such an amazing perspective for all of us to share. So I don't know where do I start with this, Calvin? I guess in March 2020.
Yeah, it was very surreal. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I knew what worked for me. And then we go back to habits. I knew that I like to write down what I was seeing in the moment, because I don't want to. I hate that feeling of like, how do we know each other again? Or like, where did I see you before? That's so embarrassing.
Right.
So it's on my travel blog. I have a list of everyone I've met on my travels that I've befriended in the hostel or on a bus. And that carried over into a period when we couldn't travel. And since travel was the thing that filled my cup when I was stressed from medical school or residency, the Hong Kong and San Diego trip, the healthy addiction, I lost that when the pandemic, because it was no longer ethical to travel. Travel had to shut down. I couldn't go anywhere, even if I wanted to. And it was not going to end anytime soon. It was not like the pandemic had an expiration date. I mean, we're kind of still going through it right now, but we've managed. But at March, April, May, it was nothing for the foreseeable future. So the only thing I could do is pretend I was feeling like I was traveling, and I was writing. Was the only thing that kept me close to the feeling of traveling, because I was writing as I was traveling for the last 12 years, blogging live. Anytime I couldn't blog, it was because I had no signal in Antarctica or Cuba. And so when it came to the pandemic, that was the adventure that I didn't sign up for, but still treated as such so that it felt manageable, and therefore I could face it head on like I would face any unknown. Just a little more negative sense compared to all the nice, fun adventures I would have pre-pandemic. So sharing that with a community like I always have, I didn't promote it. I didn't want to ask for more followers, but I think it struck a nerve in a time where people were all at home wondering what this invisible enemy they were fighting. I mean, if Russian tanks roll down the street or paratroopers from North Korea fly in, then okay, I'm going to stay home so that I don't get shot or whatever, because it's so obvious, it's so pertinent and tangible. But when it's like something like a virus that's like so unseen, people have a harder time grappling. Why am I staying home? I know I should, but I don't feel the tangible. I can't feel it. I can't touch it. I can't see it. So some part of it may be doubting it. Maybe I could step outside, but then they see what I'm going through behind the walls of the emergency room. And they have a better context of, okay, it's being managed right now. This is what I'm staying home for. There are people out there fighting this fight. And, this is the reasons why I need to do the things I do during March and April, so that we don't get overwhelmed and we lose our hospitals. And then when it's my turn to get sick, I don't end up, waiting in the street in 30-degree weather.
I love how you document those early days. You take us through what's happening both in the ER in front of you with the patients you're treating, and what's happening in your own mind when it's at the very beginning and you don't have your eyewear on and you wiped your forehead, and then you start going right down the spiral. You, the physician in the ER while treating a patient, start going down that spiral, and you catch yourself and you get back to work. And your training, I know, and you're a deep, thoughtful guy, but I don't know how you go through that more than a few times a shift, much less a week, much less, in one case at least, 17 days in a row. I don't know if you beat that record, but doing shifts, I don't know how many hours long, and going through that. How did you, at that very beginning, did you really think that you were going to get sick and die?
Oh, yeah. I thought this was it. It was... Every time I had a tickle in my throat, I'm like, I'm fucked. It's like that. I allude in the book to 28 Days Later, where all you need is a drop of blood in your eye, or get licked, go bit once by a zombie that gets too close.
Right.
But you just gotta keep moving. What are you gonna do? Freeze when the zombies come out of you? You gotta just keep moving. You either fight back or you run and hide and redirect. And just you otherwise stasis, can only be so good for so long. And as long as I had every waking breath that I felt that, I could live, that was an act of defiance of saying, fuck you to this pandemic. And, there's a sense of rebelliousness that acts as fuel to you every day that you're still alive. So that kind of added up on itself. And yeah, the book is not about what we do. I mean, there are plenty of better books and better writers that write about what healthcare workers do. But I don't think there's enough about how we think and how vulnerable we are, especially when we face something so unknown like a new pandemic with no known cures or vaccines or preventatives. And it was just coming so quickly, and us losing all the things that keep us afloat, which is, social engagement with other friends and family and loved ones, yoga, gyms, traveling. So we had to only rely on each other, just like one would face war or a battle that they don't know what they're getting themselves into. You do it for one another. So I also went in for the people next to me. When I look, and I wrote, like, I had to include my medical team as part of the thinking process of why I decided to get back in it after the spiral. That's what gets me out of the spiral. It's the people next to me.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about it, comparing it to war, and I think it's a perfect comparison. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize what people go through war. It's not my comparison. It's that a lot of people keep alluding to war during the pandemic because it was the closest thing people can relate to a shit show. What's more shit show than war? When a pandemic comes around, there was a home front, there was, the battlefront, they call it the front lines, PPE and protection. So obviously it became a natural analogy. So that's why I have to. Yeah, no,
I think it's apt. I think other people can unpack that, combat veterans and journalists who have been in combat and so on. But I don't know. I've interviewed them as well, and I think there's a lot to compare. What was your career as a physician in ERs like before March 2020 and a pandemic, and after, in terms of kind of how often you saw people dying? Because I feel like my understanding is a lot of doctors are like, I didn't sign up for this. A lot of physicians, a lot of nurses. I didn't think there was going to be this kind of like people dying, and I could also die as well. Like, what changed almost overnight in terms of what you'd seen? I'm sure you'd seen a lot of tough things, horrible things, death in the ER and after.
It's like the bandwidth and mana of only so much helplessness that you can feel in a shift. You can accommodate maybe one or two where you're just like, I can't do anything about this.
Yeah.
But that's part of life. Like, we need to normalize death a little more as something that's probably only than 100% of the human population experiences. So if 100% of us experiences death, then we can accommodate for a little bit of futility, a little bit of feeling like what we do is never enough, and having the bandwidth to even have conversations over end of life decisions, hospice care, and what their final wishes are. But if you do that for all of 12 hours, an entire shift, every day with no end in sight and no breaks, and that knowing that you might one day have that very same conversation when it's your turn on the patient bed as a healthcare worker, the irony of that, because there's not enough PPE and because society has largely abandoned, you feel like they have abandoned you because you're looking for a mask that shouldn't be even the one you're wearing, because that's not even enough.
Right.
What I'm alluding to is a surgical mask compared to a positive air purifying respirator, things that we see in the movies,
right,
with Outbreak and Contagion. Those things are the things we need to be wearing, and yet we're hunting for medieval battle armor for 21st century, 22nd century warfare.
Yeah.
And so all those thoughts come into your brain of just going to work. That's just another day in the life, where right before the pandemic, you didn't have to think about those things. And then one day later, you have to accommodate all those emotions and feelings. And then when you go home, everyone's scared of touching you and being around you. So you're feeling even more isolated. What is the encouragement that you're going to get to go back into work? There's no incentive.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. I want to talk to you. I'm trying to do, we'll talk again, I'm sure, and hopefully, soon and in person and on air and off air. but I'm trying to get to just a couple of other things that are really important to ask, I think, that I really want to know, and we'll come back to other things because I have so many follow-ups. I definitely want to ask you. So your name is Sun, and your parents are Chinese. You're Chinese American. I don't know how you identify. It doesn't matter. The point of my question is, you have a Chinese face, an Asian face, and people are really racist. And the pandemic was thought to have started in China. And at one point, even in my community, I heard someone say, "Don't order Chinese food. It's like you can get it from the food." So the absurdity of the ignorance and racism was if it wasn't so absurd, you would just sit there and focus on how horrible and evil and terrible it is. But as a physician with your face and someone's here scared, did that come up? And we saw obviously people being attacked in the streets with had any kind of Asian appearance ethnically, in New York and elsewhere across the country. How is it to be you as a physician during this pandemic with all of those racist theories being spread even by the then president of the United States? You know the question I'm getting at. I'm sorry if I've stumbled to the wording of it or offended anybody, but I think it's, exactly what I mean.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not going to absolve them of guilt, but wow, thankful for what I experienced in middle school, being bullied for my race.
What happened?
Oh, in Trinity, they just it was racist love. I mean, in public school, they would just call me chink, and I would fight back. But in Trinity, it was kind of subtle, so I didn't know what to fight back against.
Right.
I love China, or with the best of intentions, with the worst of behavior. We judge others by their behaviors and only ourselves by our intentions. So they were like, what did I say? And you knew it hurt. The expectations that you'd be good at math because of your race.
Right.
And all things that seem very positive on the surface takes away your humanity below it. And I felt it, but couldn't understand it. And, having the public school being more direct and saying, "I don't like you because you're different." Well, great. Then we're on, then you're communicating with me.
At least
then I just know then we're not going to be friends.
Right. I know where we stand.
Then if somebody says, "I am racist," I admit that if someone said that, then I would be like, great, we can start from there. There's a little bit of self-awareness.
Right.
And I respect that But if people says, "I am not racist," but then say all these racist things, then you're like,
usually, by the way,
I don't know how to navigate that.
My experience is that usually the phrase "I am not racist" or "I don't have a racist bone in my body" is usually followed by something racist. But anyway, go ahead.
The disclaimers are more offensive. Right. When anyone says, "I don't want to get political," that statement itself is political.
Yes.
So that was something in COVID that I went into knowing it's going to be really bad. But also keep in mind, I am 6'1". I'm a cisgender heterosexual man. Hopefully, since middle school, I learned a few things about being outspoken and taking care of myself. I'm a little better at sports now or being athletic than I was back then. I did not actually receive any direct threats of physical harm that a lot of my colleagues and friends in the Asian American community experienced. Because I didn't experience it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It definitely is a big problem. It does exist. And we have to, stand up and speak on behalf of them and pick up people when they fall. But I did experience the Trinity version of it, which was this micro behaviors that made you knew what they were thinking, and they were acting in a certain way that made you feel less of a human and less of an individual. They were seeing you as the race, the person that may be the reason why there's a pandemic in the first place. You could feel it. It's like someone staring at you in the cafe or on the street. You can feel that energy.
Yeah.
And there's a negative connotation to that staring. And they mean well and they want to prove themselves wrong. But there's an overwhelming influence of society that one harbors that they lash out in a way that they would surprise themselves with. We talked about middle school. These kids that bullied me was because they were probably going through their own issues and they were so afraid. All they knew, and it was so overwhelming of an environment like Trinity, where you're supposed to be appreciative of all the privilege that you have and it's a wonderful education, and all that pressure builds up to then lash out against someone that you feel can be your receptacle for that crap. In COVID, I was feeling it all over again, where all these people that were afraid, and understandably so, it's okay to be afraid during a pandemic, didn't know how to reconcile that fear into something that was healthy. They instead chose something that felt very easy, a habit, a learned habit that they probably picked up from all the influences from society, whether it was the president at the time or other people in their community that were just meaner and probably normalized bullying. And they themselves would just find themselves doing that onto their behaviors, interactions with me. But the way I dealt with it was I went in with knowing, having experienced it before in Trinity, and just seeing that they were afraid with compassion. And just like you as a coach on the sports team, I would redirect that energy like jiu-jitsu onto them with humor.
Yeah.
I wrote in the book that this guy was like, I am here to get a COVID test because I think I got it from this Asian guy that coughed or sneezed like 100 feet away down the lobby. And I was like, what, did you get up really close with him? I wrote it a little nicer in the book, but like the truth is like, were you really, really close with him? Like, did you get up? And it's like, it's kind of like a weak thing. And then the wife just reamed him. He's like, oh no, like I see what he's getting at. And he got it, and he felt embarrassed because his wife was like, well, I'm taking the doctor's side. And when you lose the side of your wife takes the other side,
yes,
you know you lost.
Yes.
And he excused himself and left because he had no symptoms. And I was like, you're going to catch COVID here because not because of the Asian guy, but because of your fear of the Asian guy.
Interesting.
You are your own worst enemy. Had you taken 5 minutes to think about it, you may have prevented the need to bring you and your wife to the emergency room filled with COVID, and now you're fucked. So that's, I think, what we can only do, that compassion. I'm not going to get in the well with them, but I at least can do the little bit of my energy that I have to make them see for themselves, and they learn it on their own. And when they do, then they own it. Then it's them. So rather than you forcing their information and your knowledge on them, they come up with it on their own and realize, oh man, I shouldn't be here. And I could have prevented COVID if I just thought about my fears a little more.
Can we do part 2 soon? Because I literally have to go one more interview today, and I am not even near done. I have so many more thoughts, and I've been really enjoying the book. And by then, in a week or two, I'll be done with the book. And I want to talk about your travel and all that you've learned, and do that soon. So can we pick up where we left off, and I'll put them both together?
I can do this all day. I'm free all next week. Tomorrow, I don't know. It's
all right. Well, let me just, for listeners now, this is the end of part 1 of a multi-part conversation, which I hope you become a regular guest here, because what a fascinating perspective in life you've had, and our unique relationship is really special. Yeah. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and I have so many more stories to bring up, and I look forward to the next time we chat.
I cannot wait. How about that? Dr. Calvin's son. He will be back, I'm sure, and I'll be seeing him soon as well. The Monsoon Diaries, a doctor's journey of hope and healing from the ER front lines through far reaches of the world. Really cool guy. Go follow and support him on social media as well. Dude is ripped. I'm looking at him on Twitter and Instagram, and he's doing great. I love it. At Monsoon Diaries on Twitter and Instagram. Monsoon Diaries. Go check him out and learn more about him, and let him know you heard him here on the show, and go get the book. All right. Well, that's all I've got for you on today's episode of Stand Up Tomorrow. Episode number 700. How about it? Hope to see you in the Discord chat, Discord platform, anytime. Well, every Thursday at our Hangouts, which are always a riot, and I need your support, so sign up for a subscription so you can be a part of that community. If you want to be a part of our street team as well, you can email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, or mention it over in the Discord platform, where we've got our own channel over there for people to help promote the show, and that's it. That's all I've got for you. Love you guys. Thanks very much for listening. I will talk to you tomorrow. Go be the change you want to see in the world.
Off on your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Oh, got to stand